Let us pray. Our Father, thou knowest that we love you. We wouldn't be here if we didn't love you. But not one of us are satisfied with our love. We want it to be greater. We want it to be magnified by your love. We all want to understand how to love God, even as Jesus loved him, that we might love our fellow men wherever they are, whatever their condition, whatever their color, whatever their creed. We want to love them as Jesus loved them. And we know that that's only possible as we let your love dwell in our hearts. Teach us how to love. We ask it in the name of Jesus. Amen. Now I'm going to ask someone to turn that fan off. I don't need it. Thank you. I'm never conscious of weather when I'm talking. You know, every new group you face is a thrill. You know, it's a great, great opportunity, and it makes you feel so humble. It makes you feel so unworthy. And then you have to recall that Jesus said of himself he could do nothing. It was the Father in him that did the works, and then you remember that that's all you're doing. You're just losing yourself and letting the Father look out over the group and love them as he loves them. And you're just yielding yourself to him with all that you know how, that you might be utterly lost and oblivious, and just let him take over and flow out. Now every one of us are here because we are seeking deeper things. We're seeking a better way of life that works more effectively in the world that we are living in. And we know that we are living in a world of great crises. I believe that you and I are living in the greatest time that any Christians have ever been permitted to live. Great, because the need is greater. I don't think any Christians since the first century have faced greater opportunities than you and I face. I don't believe there's ever been a time when God is calling to his children in more pleading tones to come and yield their all to him than he is today. And that's the only way that we're going to meet the great issues in our world today, is to utterly lose ourselves. And as we lose ourselves, we find himself. And until we've lost our very all in him, we will not have hold of his all in us. We have to bring him just utterly empty vessels if we are going to be filled full of his spirit and his wisdom and his love, his power, everything that he has to offer to meet today's need. And that isn't easy. It's just about the hardest thing that anyone can do, is to lose themselves and find God. Now, it's not hard to find God when we lose ourselves. For God is seeking us far more than we're seeking him. And to me, one of the humbling things is that God needs us. God needs us as much as we need him. Now, That might sound sacrilegious, but God chose it that way. God chose for his great dream of the kingdom on earth to await the generation that would yield their all to him and let him in us and through us bring it into reality. And I believe that anyone who's thinking deeply today, who's taking time to be still and to be led, to be filled, to be directed, realizes that this kingdom is either going to come in our generation. I don't mean completely, perhaps, but I mean in our generation that most of us are going to see. We're either going to make this kingdom so real that all of God's children the world over are going to know that it's going to be theirs, that we're helping to bring them into it, and it's going to be possible for everyone to have it and to know what abundant life really means. For Jesus said he came in the world that we might have life. All have life, and have it abundantly. And God had prepared enough in this world, has prepared, it's still here, for every one of his children the world over to live abundantly, not just miserly, half-filled, half-able. But what God has ordained and prepared and has available is an abundance for everyone the world over. And it isn't God's fault that it hasn't been found and appropriated and used and made real and visible long before now. But when God gave the plan, he gave the way. And when people couldn't seem to understand the way without seeing it lived out, made visible, made tangible, and something they could get hold of without too much struggling to understand, he set to send Jesus in the world. We know that practically everything that Jesus taught you could find somewhere in the Old Testament. And yet people didn't know how to take hold of it and make it theirs and live it out and prove it. And so God said a part of himself, his own spirit, as much as could possibly be crammed into human form. And he came facing everything that you and I could ever face. God didn't give him any special privileges. He didn't put him in any easy place. In fact, it seems that he chose about the hardest. That he found a way to make Jesus have to meet everything that any one of us anywhere would ever have to meet, to show us how to use it for good and conquer all things that are less than perfect, and walk in his way and prove its reality. Now, since Jesus, he showed us the way, he gave us the truth, he was the truth. He was the one perfect life that we can follow in any situation and always find the perfect answer, but only as it's followed utterly and completely. Only as we follow the central truth that he taught. And I do believe that this was the central truth that Jesus taught, given us more than any other one thing he taught. If you would be my disciples, you must deny yourself and take up your cross and follow me. Jesus carried his cross. And you and I, everyone, have crosses to bear. And yet we don't think of the cross. I love that truth that was expressed. For the joy that was set before him, he endured the cross. And I believe that literally. I absolutely believe with all the suffering, with all the agony that Jesus suffered, I believe the joy was even greater. And I believe that every one of us can prove that no matter what we're suffering, how deep the agony of soul, if we had yielded our all to Christ, I believe the joy outweighs the agony. For the joy that was set before him, he endured the cross. And that's waiting for us. That is ours. I'm sure if you look back into some of your most tragic hours, you can find in it things that have blessed your lives ever since. I'm sure you have. It flittered across my mind. I hadn't intended this, but it just flittered across, so I use it. There was a year, or nearly a year, in the life of our Koinonia, when it seemed that the human dazzled us so that we got led a little bit by the human. And our whole vision was given us by God. We started out humbly, knowing that the only way that Koinonia could ever be or do or become was just following Jesus. It wasn't our responsibility except to respond to his ability. And as long as we let the responsibility lie on him and we just followed on and kept our hearts and souls sensitive, he led the way. And then we got tempted. We ought to have big names. Nobody knew the names of our directors. Who were these people? Why, of course we wouldn't get any world recognition. We didn't have anybody on the council much or on the trustees that the world thought was great. Why should they follow that? Why should they help that? And so we became dazzled with big names that could come on our board. Well, God didn't lead us there. If God had needed the big names, he'd have given them to us. But you know, sometimes we do get dazzled by what the world considers great. And the Lord just withdrew his favor. And we went through agonizing times. I tell you, it was agony of soul. I can tell you this, nobody ever saw Glenn Harding lose his joy. Not one. He didn't lose it for a second. And the Lord poured enough through him to keep the joy there. But the lessons that we all learned during those times were the most valuable lessons perhaps we've learned in Koinonia. And if you look back into your times of agony, haven't you learned your best lessons? Hasn't it driven you to the end of yourself where you knew you couldn't? You were just utterly helpless in God's hands. And when you stop the struggle, for God can't help us as long as we're struggling, you've got to be still and let him know you trust him and that even this situation isn't too hard for him. Nothing's too hard for him. But he cannot help you as long as you're struggling. You've got to look up in his face knowing that you can't, but God can. You've got to let that joy come flowing through and make you know that God's joy is great enough. His grace, His truth, His power is more than sufficient always, and He'll lead you in the way. And we really learned our best lessons during those agonizing months. And He resolved the whole thing. It was just thrilling the way He resolved it. And then the blessings that He poured out upon us. Why, He poured out more in 3 months than we could have had all those preceding months during the agony. Oh, if we could just trust Him. If we could just know that when we bring our helplessness to Him, He's always able. He can take the worst that ever happened to us and He can lift us into higher heights than we would have ever attained without it. If we could count it all joy when we face these trials and temptations and seemingly impossible times. Every one of them are intended for greatness. Everything that comes in our lives, God means for good. And God will lift it into greater good when we bring our helplessness to Him. Bring our weaknesses. He's promised not just our strength for our weakness, but He's promised His strength for our weakness. He takes our weakness and makes it the strongest thing about us when it's utterly yielded. And when we're confident, when we can hold true and unwavering. But how many of us have it? Well, He's always trying to help us to have it. But the thing is, we just haven't understood. I'm sure that Jesus' prayer today is still what it was there on the cross. Father, forgive them. They know not. They don't seem to understand. It looks so hard and so foolish. It looks so contrary to the way of life. They just haven't understood. Father, forgive them. I'm sure He's still praying that prayer for us today. And yet we could understand if we would. There isn't any reason, after all these centuries since Jesus came and lived the way and revealed it in His own light, there isn't any reason why we do not understand. But I can tell you why we don't understand. It's because we haven't taken time to be still and quiet and sensitive and open for Him to come in and fill us and direct us and whisper His secrets to us. If we could only believe that He wants to tell us, He wants to be in us, He wants to live in us and do through us far more than our human hearts could ever conceive of. And He is seeking us. He is watching every little crevice that we open to Him. And He comes in every time we give Him an opening. And yet He never forces. He never breaks down the barriers Himself. He just has to wait. But oh, I don't think that He's ever pled with us so much as today. I don't believe there's ever been a time when He needs us at our fullest and our best as today. I believe it was right here in your own state. The Dr. Walter Judd recently stepped up the time that I'd been telling. For I've been saying ever since last August and September, when I was in Junaluska, our great Methodist assembly in the southeastern jurisdiction, I had been in that great week of evangelism with some of our world's great leaders. And in that week, well, it was a week of evangelism. I want you to know the evangelism centered around the Great Commission. That the evangelism wasn't just for a favored people. Their great concern was that 3/4 of God's children today do not even know that God cares about their condition. And they do not know that God really loves them, or that God is able to bring them out of their misery and degradation and agony of soul, insecurity. They don't know there's a God who cares, and it isn't their fault. It's our fault. You and I have known it all our lives. It came to us cheap and easy. We inherited our religion. And you know, a religion we inherit isn't anything like so strong and irresistible as one that we've been out and proven in hard places. The early Christians had something that was irresistible. They had a power and a light that everyone could recognize. They didn't dare walk on the street when they were being haunted and persecuted, for anyone could recognize a Christian by his countenance. Wouldn't it be wonderful if Christians today could be that glowing, that radiant, that irresistible, that wonderful reflection of Jesus, that as you walk down the street, everyone would know, there goes a Christian. No, I fear it's come to us too cheap and too easy. Our religion has become something very pleasant and very beautiful, and we've built more beautiful sanctuaries, and we've made them more comfortable, and we've built more wonderful programs, and we've spread ourselves. And 3/4 of God's children do not know He loves them. Now, that kind of religion is not going to continue. And that's what we face every day of the week of evangelism and every day in those weeks of the World Methodist Conference Convention. We had the great leaders in our church from all over the world, and all of the nations were represented there by their very best. And everyone were concerned. They know the unrest that's going on in the other side of the world. They know the world is on the march. They know that these people that have been pressed down so long, that the power has risen. It's like steam that's been accumulating. And the time has come when something's going to blow. And they're either going to blow and destroy our civilization. You can't hold them back now. They're on the march. They've seen what we have. So we had radio, and the world became so small that it's a community, and they saw how we lived. They saw our worst movies, and they think we're all just like those movies. And somehow they are not going to live on the level that they've been living on. They'd rather die. And so they're on the march, and if it means death, all right. Death is preferable to the way they've been living. And nothing is going to stop them. Now the communists say that every change of civilization comes through explosive measures. And there's going to be a great explosion if we do not fulfill Jesus' way. And his way is not explosive. His way is the way of the kingdom. It's the way of the leaven. It's the planting of his Spirit in every place around the world. And when you plant the leaven of his Spirit anywhere, in any need, it will work as invincibly as the leaven in the lump of dough. You don't see it working. You can sit and watch that lump of dough all day. You do not see it working, but it is working. Silently and invisibly, it is leavening the whole lump. And that's much more powerful than the explosive way. Now the communists are leading the world into the explosive way. And in Junaluska, they said frankly, they took 10 years of the time, and they all agreed on it. I mean the ones that came from over there in those nations where they saw what was going on. They felt it keenly. They suffered with it. They said the United States does not have more than 10 years to make the whole world know that we are going to help lead them into abundant life. We are going to see that they have all the things that satisfy and make life beautiful. And if they do not see that within the next 10 years, the United States is going to be blotted off the earth. And last summer they said it would only take 5 bombs to fall on the United States at the same time, and they picked the places. And those 5 bombs dropped at the same time would just blot us off the map. There wouldn't be any United States left. Now that isn't just funny talk. Babylon was obliterated that much. Why, we didn't even know for sure where Babylon was until a generation ago when archaeologists said, we think it's here, we'll go down and search. And it was there beneath the level of the earth. And they found a great civilization that had been lost. They found the equivalent of our Frigidaire. Babylon in the time of Christ. We didn't have Frigidaires again until a generation ago, did we? Oh, yes, this civilization of ours can be blotted out, and the wonderful things we've enjoyed could be lost to civilization for maybe another 1,000 or so years. But every one of them ended on an optimistic note and said it isn't going to be. Because our churches are awakening, and there is the key. An inherited religion doesn't have much power. It doesn't have much discipline. I mean of the, oh yes, we all have our disciplines. We bring a new one out in the Methodist Church every 4 years, and we all read the disciplines, and here it is. How many of us live it? Now, a discipline written in the book isn't going to save the world. It's only the discipline that's written in your heart and in your life that's going to save the world. A disciple is a disciplined person. Not one that's driven to discipline, but one who chooses to streamline his life. This one thing I do. Most of us lose our power. We just do a little bit of everything. We've just got to run to this meeting and that meeting. We've got to be secretary here and president here and something else over there. And we've just spread ourselves all over the earth. And lots of us waste our whole lives that way. I was guilty too. But we aren't going to save the world that way. God put each of us here for one great big purpose. And the world needs what he's given to each one of us. And no one else can ever do our part. And God knows that part, and God will lead us into that part if we'll be led. If we're willing to be obedient and committed and follow. That's why the world's in the conditions today. He had the whole method. He had the whole way. Jesus gave it to us. But we haven't really followed. He hasn't had enough of us who have handed our very all over and said, here, Father, just do that thing you put me in the world to do, and be in me all of that. Just live in me, and so that we might say, for us to live is for Christ, to be living again in us. And that's what he offers to do. Paul, over and over in the book of Corinthians, 2 books, just constantly says, do you not know that your body is a temple of the living God? And his Spirit makes its home in you. That means he lives there. That means he abides there all the time. These human bodies of ours are temples where the living God abides. It's his home. And he's there with all the power and the wisdom and the grace and resources. He's there with everything that lived in Jesus potentially. Have we let him run it? Have we let him direct our lives? Have we let him lead us into that place that he put us in the world to fill? He isn't going to push us. He isn't going to drive us. But any second that we turn and hand it over, he's going to lead us. Because he never runs away and leaves us. We aren't going to ever catch him unaware. He's ready any minute. All you have to do is really mean it when you say, here am I. Just really take me and make me what you want and use me as you will. That's all we have to do and mean it. And he takes over. And then Paul asks us in that the second book of Corinthians, the last chapter, the 5th verse. Do you not know that Jesus Christ lives in you? I wish I could stamp that in every soul. Would anything ever get us all confused and worried and bothered and fretted and anxious and fearful if we knew that Jesus Christ lives in us? Is there anything that he doesn't know how to solve? Is there any problem too great for him to turn it into a great victory and use it for good? He means it when he said all things work together for good, not for everybody. But to those who love the Lord, and that means really love him with your whole being. And if you love him with your whole being, you're going to love his whole world as he loved it. Now that's one of the conditions. And then the other is you let his purpose be fulfilled in your life. Now, when you just yield your all and let his love come in and make your life what he wants it to be, and you're letting him fulfill his purpose in you, then everything that comes into your life is intended for good and will work out for good. He'll use it to lift you higher, to make you stronger, to make you more understanding, to give you more victory and more power. And so with that promise alone, we could face anything in life that comes, no matter when or how. And God will bring it to victory and use it for greater good. And so as you forget everything else I've said this morning, remember this: Jesus Christ lives in you. The risen Christ, the one that conquered death, the one that let evil do everything that evil could ever conceive or contrive to do. He didn't resist it. Jesus followed his own laws, you know. When he said, resist not evil, love your enemies, he did it. And we'd never be called to try it under any harder circumstances. It worked. But it became redemptive. That greatest agony, the greatest thing that evil could ever do to defeat him, was turned into the greatest victory that was ever achieved. The cross became redemptive and still is. When we take the crosses that come to us and we face them as Jesus did, don't go out and try to resist. Don't try to justify yourself or explain it. Let God do that. Just pour back love. And in every instance it will become redemptive. And he let them kill him. And then he conquered death. Now that living Christ, that conquering Christ, that Spirit of the living God abides in you and me. What have we been doing with it? Well, most of us have kept it locked in the closet. Most of us have not opened the door and said, take over, Father. Whatever the cost, and sometimes we may think the cost is going to be great. But really, the joy is greater. The peace that he offers you is unshakable. There isn't anything can shake it if you're letting him carry on and lead you as it's unshakable. And that's far greater than any agony you could ever suffer. Now, I told you what the world leaders said last summer. But 6 months later, what are these leaders saying? Oh, we're living in a world that's moving fast. Dr. Walter Judd, and we all know him and love him. We all know that he's one of God's great prophets today. We all know that there perhaps isn't anyone in our country that feels the pulse of the people of the East any more than Walter Judd. Well, of course, our Frank Laubach's right up there with him. And I might mention a few others, but they'll do. When he comes with a message after having been over among them and felt, he speaks with authority. He says it won't be over 5 years. Now, in 6 months' time, the tensions have grown. The people are more in earnest. They're more determined. They're marching. Nothing's going to stop them. Now, you and I may have the privilege of directing their march, the goal of their march. It's either going to be the kingdom or you and I are going to lose our opportunity. For today is the opportunity of the United States. We have been as definitely chosen for today's great opportunity as the children of Israel were chosen to give the world the understanding of one God, who was a father of all mankind and who was a father of love. Now we know that 21 great civilizations have failed today, gone down utterly, because they did not fulfill their great divine purpose. God let them raise the great heights that he might use them. He gave them so much of the glories of heaven and earth. And then they took these things and used them selfishly. You can't use God's gifts selfishly and keep them. And they were lost civilizations. This is our crucial time, and Walter Judge says we don't have but 5 years to make the world know. But we've got every means in the world of letting them know in 5 years. We don't have to worry, how can it be done? That's God's part. Most of us fail because we worry about God's part. Our part is to give our all to him and let him direct us. We don't have to know. We don't have to know even one day in advance or one step in advance. We are following a living Christ who understands, who knows the way, who holds all power in heaven and earth, and who knows my part and your part, and he knows how to lead us where we are through every circumstance we're facing. But he's not going to drive us. He's offering us everything. But he's waiting. Now, how do we take hold of it? There isn't but one way. And Jesus showed us the way. You know, when Jesus began preaching, he just had such a simple message. Something that everybody could understand, something that everybody could take hold of. And it was the same message that John had. Repent. For the kingdom of heaven is at hand. This kingdom of heaven that you and I today are heirs of. That you and I are called today to make real on earth. And it can be done. Don't worry about how is God going to have enough. That isn't your part. That's God's part. Your part is, am I going to do my part? That's all we're responsible for. Am I doing my part? Am I utterly committed? Am I letting him lead me step by step? And he'll take care of the overall. Don't you worry about that. For God has his witnesses in every land, in every island. We have a very wonderful admiral in Malta, retired admiral, who had retired before the Second World War, but went back in to serve during the Second World War. And so he retired the second time after the World War was over, second. He was brought up as a Quaker. It was as natural for him to get still and listen for God's direction as it is for us to listen to the one we love and go their way. All of his life, he's given his first hours in the morning to listening to God for his direction. And he's had the courage to follow it. Now, he had a great love for the sea, and he became a sailor boy, and he followed it, for he loved the sea. It had a lure that lured him on. He said he had never been in any place in the world, and he said, I've been in every nation, and I think I've been on every inhabited island. But I have never been anywhere that I didn't find a witness for Christ. Yes, God has his witnesses. God knows how to spread them out, and when you are utterly sensitive to him, and when he can direct your life and make you what he wants, if he's finished with your witness here, he'll get you where he needs you. And he isn't going to make you neglect your family. He isn't going to make you neglect anything else that should have a first pull upon you. Oh, he knows how to manage it all right. And he knows how to reach and plant the leaven of the Spirit all over creation. That's his part. So don't you worry about it. This admiral said, God's got the plan already. He has everything ready to go, but us, we're the ones that are holding it back. And the reason we're holding it back is because we haven't followed that first instruction. And that's to repent. And what does that word repent mean? Just the same thing I've been talking about. Denying yourself. Turning around, changing your direction. Stop going your own way, go God's way. Let God lead you into his place, in his own way. For when we try to save our lives, we're losing our lives. We're losing the whole purpose for which God placed us in the earth. And we're losing the kingdom. The only thing that's going to work is change the direction. Stop going your own way, go God's way. And that lifts you above these human limitations. It lifts you up here on this plane where everything goes the way God wants it to go. Where all the resources are available, all the wisdom, all the plans. And everything clicks. For up here it's under the dominion of God. And there are no collisions, there are no overlappings, there are no empty spaces. He's made it so simple. Just change your direction. Just give it to him and let him take over, and you can be so relaxed. You can be so free. You can keep that joy and that victory because you see it's God that's taken over. And then when Jesus selected his first prayer group, and that's what I like to think of the 12 as being, I think it was his prayer group. For Jesus knew he's the author of all wisdom and all authority and all power. He knew that in the great issues of life, we need the power multiplied by lives coming together and being lost in a united thing. And when he could bring a group together who were one in spirit, who were following the one guidance and marching as one, he knew that the kingdom would become a reality. And so he chose his prayer group to plan it that way and prepare them. Now, I don't believe that any one of us will ever find the fullness of God's plan for us and all the power to fulfill it till we've not only yielded our all to him, we've not only taken time every day to be filled and directed and led into his place, but until our power is multiplied and united with others. One can chase 1,000, but two can chase 10,000. So every time we become one in spirit with another, we multiply the power by 10. God needs groups like that today. He needs his churches today to be one in spirit, to be marching as one. The time has come for us to stop singing like a mighty army moves the church of God until we're actually doing it. We're not marching as one. Our hearts are not attuned utterly to each other and to our leader and to all the needs in the world. We're not marching as one. That's what we're going to have to find in the next 5 years. But we're finding it. For our great churches, and don't forget the commission was given to the church. And the kingdom isn't coming until it's the churches that are leading out in this and showing the way. And until we forget our little differences and the things that separate us as denominations are minor things. I have found I can go into any church of any denomination, and I've been invited in most of them. I do not alter my message. Where I go, I keep the same kind of message, and I haven't been put out yet. I've been wondering why this isn't sometimes. But I haven't been put out. Why? Because these things that we are talking about in our camp are the central things. It's the foundation. We are putting Jesus where he belongs, and that's at the center. And too often, we forget the center. There is no other name given under the sun whereby men must be saved, at the name of Jesus. And sometimes we get so lost in the program, so lost in side issues, that we fail to keep the center, and you've lost the power every time you get off center. Christ is the center. He is the beginning. He is the end. He is the pioneer. He is the perfecter. He is the author. He is the sustainer. He is the Alpha. He is the Omega. And we begin with him, and we follow through with him, and we end with him. He is the goal. And we're not going to meet the issue if we get away from him as the center. And when we stick on center, there isn't any barrier that's going to separate the denominations. And the world hasn't listened to us because we've been just doing like this. We haven't stood together. Now we are the church. And don't you go back and say anything against your church, for the church is what we've made it. And if we have something to say against it, say it to yourself. Don't go and say it to somebody else. Say it to yourself. We have failed. We haven't understood. We have looked down our noses at some of these others that don't think as we think and not quite as dignified in their rituals and programs as some others. Why, God lets everybody express themselves as they feel it, as it meets their need, and if some like it one way and some like it another, that's all right. Just as long as we're following Jesus and keeping him central. And so when we go back to be the church, to love them into it and to make it so real and so lovely, so utterly irresistible that everyone will want it. You don't have to worry about the result. All of these leaders will tell you we're going to do it. Yes, we're going to do it. The marvelous thing is that our ministers, our top leaders are in these great retreats. They are learning these things. They're coming back, and when our leaders get it, we'll all get it. You know, nothing goes much higher than its leadership, does it? Well, I wish you could have all been with these top leaders last summer that I had the privilege of being with. You know they've caught the vision. You know they know the way, and they're following the way, who is Christ. And that Christ is out leading you and me. He's going to lead us every step of the way, and we don't have to fear. We don't have to worry. We don't have to have any anxiety. Are we going to let him? I'd like for every one of us this morning to end this with a commitment of our lives. I'd like for us to start out this camp with such oneness of spirit that God will lead this camp to heights that have never been attained before. We rather thought that happened in the Arkansas camp last week. By the end of the first day, we felt that that whole camp was one in spirit, and it was an overflowing camp. But we really felt that they had attained unity of spirit, unity of purpose, and a willingness to be lost and hidden that God might lead us on. And it went to the most thrilling height. God can let this go even higher. I know he wants to. I know you want it, don't you? We wouldn't be here if we didn't want it. Are we ready to pay the price? Now, if we are, that price is going to be every day time alone with God. You know why I was too tired to come to the meeting last night? I was up at 4:15, but I hadn't had even 15 minutes alone to be quiet with God. And my strength, my power, my life depends upon it. I can't go through one day without that time of aloneness and quietness, and not wilt. Last night I was wilted. Now I just tell you I was wilted. If you'd had a stick over my head and said you got to come to that evening meeting, you might have pushed me out, but you wouldn't have had anything when I got there. And so I stayed away and had some time with my Father. And that's all I ever need to come back. I don't care where I am. I don't care what's happened. If I can just be alone with him and drop it all. Don't worry. He knows the answer. He knows the way. He's abundantly able to take the weakest reed that was ever handed him and make it strong. He'll always do it. He doesn't have any favorites. He wouldn't do any more for Frank Laubach than he'd do for any one of us. That's what Frank Laubach is doing now. Well, they had to catch him and throw him in bed to make him be able to have enough time. And he does pay the price for his quiet time, but he needed some extra. He's so sensitive to everyone's hurt that he suffers with everyone that comes and shares their problems with him. I think it's almost cruel to put him in a camp where he hears so many of the people's hurts, because he seems to me as sensitive as Jesus. That he suffers even as Jesus suffers over your hurt. And it takes a lot out of you when you suffer with them. So he needs this rest. Let's just thank God for giving it to him. He's not in any serious condition. He's not really ill. So let's just pour the love toward him and thank God that he's having this time to rest. Now, the secret of every one of our power, the secret of us finding the place that God wants us to fill, depends upon how much time we give him daily to be alone, still, quiet, confident, joyous, receptive, and let him in. And that means you're not talking. We do too much talking in prayer. It means we're listening. God's going to talk. God has something to say. Now there's the secret. There's where the discipline begins. That and taking time to know his word. And then the other is to come and be lost in a group. Just unite in a group where no one of us are standing out. There isn't any one person that's out beyond the other. We're all lost. We're just the lump in which the leaven of the kingdom is working. God's waiting to do powerful things through us this week. He's waiting to lead us to such heights that not just Kansas and Missouri and Oklahoma and the other surrounding states are going to know it. The United States is going to know it.